Welcome to Core Concept HQ, where big ideas are simplified. Today, we are undertaking one of our most fascinating deep dives yet. We're getting into a book that kind of operates on this fault line between philosophy and the very foundations of modern psychiatry.
Yeah, it's an amazing blend of historical fact and this big fictional what if.
It really is.
Yeah.
The book is Irvin D. Yalom's When Nietzsche Wept.
And it's a truly unique teaching novel. Yalom, who's a renowned existential psychiatrist himself, he constructs this really intense, entirely fictional meeting in 1882 Vienna.
Right.
He creates this high-stakes moment where two titans of 19th century European thought, you've got the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and the esteemed physician Dr. Joseph Breuer, are basically forced into this radical therapeutic encounter.
So our mission today is explicitly not to, read you an audio textbook or just summarize the plot from A to Z.
That would miss the point entirely.
Exactly. The goal here is to try and pull out the core emotional and, the philosophical lessons, the real nuggets of wisdom from this incredibly insightful story. We want to get into the themes that, still haunt us today.
Yeah.
Things like the search for meaning, the burden of freedom, the paralyzing nature of despair.
And that difficult, honest struggle for self-awareness you need to live a full life.
Yeah, all of it.
And the whole thing works because of the central conceit, the fictional setup. It's just brilliant. You have Friedrich Nietzsche, who historically was, isolated, brilliant, but suffering intensely.
And not just emotionally.
No, not at all. Crippling physical ailments, blinding migraines, chronic vomiting. His vision was terrible.
Yeah.
But he was also battling this profound despair, suicidal thoughts even.
But he wouldn't admit it was despair, right?
Adamantly refused. To Nietzsche, his body was failing him, sure, but never his being. His spirit was untouchable.
And he gets into this story because he's basically engineered into it, almost ruthlessly, by this woman who had a really powerful, volatile relationship with him.
Exactly. He's maneuvered, you could almost say intellectually blackmailed, into seeing Dr. Joseph Breuer.
And Breuer, historically, was a huge deal in Vienna, one of the most respected physicians, a real medical celebrity, right?
Realist. The personal physician to the city's elite. And this is crucial. He was the intellectual mentor to a young, up-and-coming Sigmund Freud.
But here's the twist. This is the thing that turns the whole story into this study in contradiction. Breuer, for all his outward success, the wealth, the fame,
Is secretly drowning.
completely. He's drowning in his own psychological crisis. He's paralyzed by duty, suffocated by success, and just consumed by this obsessive fixation on a former patient.
So Yalom frames it not as a typical doctor-patient relationship,
No.
but as a story of two profoundly wounded healers trying to fix each other.
Yeah.
And in doing that, they basically invent a new form of therapy.
Okay, so let's set the stage a bit more. Let's meet the three main players whose lives intersect so dramatically in this fictional 1882 Vienna. First, the man who seems to have it all.
Dr. Joseph Breuer.
Dr. Joseph Breuer. He is successful, immensely respected, wealthy, married to Mathilde. He's a father of 5. But inwardly,
Inwardly, he's tormented. He describes his life, his very structured, successful life, as an ever-narrowing chute. The success he built has literally become a gilded cage.
wow. Okay, then second, we have Friedrich Nietzsche.
The intellectual firebrand, proud, totally uncompromising, intellectually arrogant, and yet deeply desperate.
And he lives a very different life from Breuer.
Oh, completely stark, itinerant. He says he carries his home in a steamer trunk all across Europe. He's in constant, debilitating pain from these headaches he calls his cerebral labor pains.
But he insists the illness actually emancipated him.
Right. It got him out of the stuffy, hollow academic life at Basel that he absolutely hated.
And finally, the catalyst for the whole drama, Lou Salome.
The pivotal figure. She's this fiercely intellectual, fiercely free Russian woman who was Nietzsche's former love interest and, his intellectual muse.
And it's her betrayal, her rejection of him, that drives his immediate consuming despair in 1882.
It's what makes him vulnerable enough to even consider seeking help. She's a fascinating character, valuing only absolute freedom and just completely rejecting any concept of domestic duty.
Okay, let's unpack this setup by diving right into the inner conflict of Dr. Breuer. This is really the heart of the novel's psychological realism. We're calling this the deep root of Breuer's despair, the unlived life.
Breuer is just the classic paradox of success. I mean, he has done everything right according to the social metrics of his time. He's achieved Immense wealth, respect, scientific renown.
He was a serious scientist, not just a popular doctor.
Absolutely. Historically famous for discovering real physiological facts. He identified the Herringbroyer reflex for respiration, did groundbreaking work on how the inner ear gives us our sense of equilibrium. This is a serious mind, treating guys like Brahms and Brentano.
But the irony is that very achievement is what's crushing him.
Exactly. He's so successful, so essential to everyone else's lives, that he describes himself as the one who must stay awake and worry for everyone while his own family sleeps soundly.
I think so many people can relate to that feeling. When responsibility stops being an honor and starts feeling like a vice, just constantly tightening around your freedom.
That's it, perfectly. His rise out of the Jewish ghetto was supposed to be liberating, proof of his infinite promise, but instead it just swapped one set of constraints, poverty and prejudice, for a new, more luxurious set.
The constraints of respectability and duty.
Right. His success didn't fulfill him, it just cemented his trap.
And this inner torment, this kind of emotional protest against his own life, it all centers on one person, a former patient, Bertha Pappenheim.
Anna O.
Anna O, as he called her in his notes. And his preoccupation with her is described in this really chilling way, a sexual affair that was entirely autistic. What does Yalom mean by that?
It means the entire relationship existed solely within his own mind. It was all projected onto her. There was no physical affair, but the mental and emotional obsession was all-consuming.
So what did she represent?
Everything his orderly Viennese life was not. She was spontaneity, passion, a kind of intellectual magic that was just the total opposite of his colorless life of strict science and decorum.
She was the vessel for his unlived life.
Exactly.
And this is where we see the intense psychological pressure he's under. It comes out in this deeply disturbing burning house fantasy. He's constantly imagining it.
Yes, and the fantasy is so specific. He imagines coming home one night, his house is engulfed in flames.
And he's the hero.
He rushes in heroically to save his wife, Mathilde, and their 5 children, but he fails. They all perish, tragically. And he's rescued. He's praised publicly for his heroic, if unsuccessful, attempt.
The guilt should be crippling.
It should be. But here's the twist in the fantasy. He's grief-stricken, yes, but he's also guiltily free for Bertha.
That's the chilling core of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The fantasy lets him achieve this radical self-liberation. He's free to escape Vienna, go to Italy or America, start a whole new life.
But only because a catastrophe has absolved him of the moral responsibility of actually choosing to abandon his family. He wants the freedom, but he doesn't have the will to choose it.
He just wants to be released by fate.
It's the perfect diagnosis for the psychology of a trapped person. You're waiting for external permission or a disaster to grant you the life you secretly want.
Which is why the real-life ending of his treatment with Bertha was so shattering for him.
Because in a moment of hysterical delirium, Bertha claims she's pregnant with his child.
And that, whether it was true or delusional, it forces Breuer's hand.
Yeah.
He has to act.
Immediately. He terminates the treatment abruptly. He's forced to reveal his profound emotional over-involvement to his wife, Mathilde, who becomes, understandably deeply resentful and mistrustful. The catastrophe didn't free him.
It just complicated his prison.
And when Breuer starts to analyze this obsession, later, with Nietzsche's help, he realizes something huge. Bertha isn't a flesh and blood woman to him.
She's a
meaning, a placeholder for escape, a symbol of freedom, and very revealingly, a safe contest, a certain victory in this silent competition with other men, especially the doctors who came after him.
So he wasn't in love with her.
He was in love with what successfully conquering her complex case represented about his own vitality and power.
That's a crucial distinction. And if his need for her is rooted in meaning, what is he sacrificing by chasing that meaning?
He's sacrificing reality. He's using Bertha as a defense mechanism against his own existential void. Yalom suggests this kind of obsession is often a distraction from something much deeper.
Like his childhood.
Exactly. Breuer's need for Bertha connects back to the loss of his mother, who was also named Bertha. She died when he was 3. So he's unconsciously seeking this adoring smile of a nurturing woman he lost at a foundational age, and he's projecting that impossible need onto his patient.
And this all just comes to a head as Breuer turns 40. The novel frames this so powerfully as the crisis of the lad of infinite promise.
It's a crisis of mortality. He realizes that this successful climb, the wealth, the respectability, the whole life of promise, was never something he actually chose.
He just inherited the goals of his culture.
That's the perfect way to put it. He followed the path out of the Jewish ghetto, he achieved all the material objectives, and then discovered, devastatingly, that his soul was never involved in the choice.
So he confused the promise of a full life with just accumulating stuff.
Professional objectives, material goods, yeah. The duty, the success, it had used him up. It left him emotionally bankrupt.
So when Nietzsche finally meets him, he essentially gives him a diagnosis without even knowing the medical history.
Pretty much. Nietzsche's philosophy would insist that Breuer had failed in his ultimate duty, the duty to become who you are.
Breuer chose comfort over chaos, safety over self-discovery.
And this unlived life, it's not just in his head, it physically manifests. You mentioned his anxiety and sleeplessness, but the novel really highlights his feeling of precordial pressure.
Which is what exactly?
It's a persistent, often alarming pressure or pain right in the chest near the heart. It's a psychosomatic cry from his soul. It's as if his chest is bursting with unlived life. His emotional self is literally protesting the cage he built.
So we have Dr. Breuer, the established man of science, totally crushed by the weight of a life unchosen, a life defined by safety and duty. Now let's flip the coin and turn to his reluctant, defiant patient, Friedrich Nietzsche, and his own intense struggle for absolute honesty.
Nietzsche's suffering is, well, it's not just existential, it is concrete and immense. He suffers chronically from these severe migraines that cause vomiting, light sensitivity, blurred vision. He saw a dizzying list of eminent physicians all over Europe.
But the central tension is how he interprets his illness.
Exactly. He sees this physical distress not as a failure, but as a paradoxical blessing, an emancipation.
Why would anyone see blinding headaches as a good thing?
Because it served his higher philosophical purpose. It forced him to resign his professorship at Basel, which he saw as a death sentence, a life of stifling routine and petty academic fights.
So his illness literally liberated him.
It did. It allowed him to pursue his solitary, radical philosophical work. He basically self-mythologized his suffering, viewing it as the necessary condition for producing profound work.
And this is where his philosophy really bleeds into psychology. He fundamentally believes that despair isn't a medical condition you can cure with pills or therapy.
No, it's a necessary state. He frames it as the inevitable price one pays for self-awareness. If you look deeply enough into the human condition, you have to find despair.
And God help the person who tries to take that despair away from him.
Woe betide them, indeed. He insists he has the courage to have black periods, and that his physical body is ill, not his being or his spirit. So for him, treating his despair would be like treating his self-awareness.
He thinks it would lower him to the level of common mediocrity.
He protects his suffering fiercely, and his life is the embodiment of this stark, uncompromising philosophy. He's constantly traveling, his few possessions in a trunk, no fixed address, no country, no stable job.
Just his difficult sister, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Who later tragically corrupted his work.
Yes, and the novel captures his loneliness so perfectly.
It does. He confesses to Breuer that sometimes he goes for days without speaking a single word. He has to invent these complex pretenses, like asking a hotel concierge a pointless question, just to tolerate his extreme aloneness.
He's desperate for connection.
But his pride and his philosophy force him to maintain this fierce isolation.
And that profound loneliness is immediately challenged by the source of his current consuming despair in 1882.
Lou Salome.
His break with Lou Salome.
Yes, that betrayal is central to his immediate breakdown. She had, in his mind, represented this possibility of a shared philosophical life. A coworker, a disciple, maybe a lover.
And when that relationship imploded, especially when she seemed to choose his friend, Paul Ray, over him.
His reaction was volatile. His letters were described as crazed, despairing. He'd mention suicide, but always end with some defensive philosophical assertion, denying the despair and protecting his fragile courage.
So when Breuer first tries to engage him in a compassionate, traditional way,
Nietzsche bristles instantly. He interprets any empathy, any kindness, as a subtle bid for power.
He equates pity with scorn.
He does. He's afraid of being used up by Breuer's attempt to help him, viewing it as a kind of intellectual domination. This is why Breuer's initial direct approach just fails spectacularly.
It's a critical psychological knot, isn't it? He can't accept help because needing help equals weakness, and weakness equals being dominated.
And his whole life is predicated on self-overcoming, not relying on others. He rejects the traditional power dynamic of the doctor's office completely.
But the reality of his hidden, consuming pain is ultimately exposed, not by Breuer's skill, but by Lou Salome herself, in a calculated and truly ruthless counter-betrayal.
She just shows up unannounced in Breuer's office, and she's not there for treatment. She's there to make sure Nietzsche doesn't die before he produces the great work she thinks he's capable of.
So how does she convince Breuer?
She exposes his most private self. She shows Breuer Nietzsche's most volatile, self-pitying letters.
The ones where he calls her.
Oh, explosive stuff. A predator clothed as a house pet and a bitch demon.
Wow.
And the sheer contrast between the polished, fiercely proud philosopher Breuer met and the desperate, suicidal writer in these letters that confirms for Breuer the extent of Nietzsche's hidden agony.
So it's the crucial piece of evidence.
It is. It's what allows Breuer to proceed with his radical plan, because now he knows the man is in despair, no matter how much he denies it in person.
It's fascinating because Lou Salome's manipulation ultimately serves a higher therapeutic purpose.
Exactly. She provides the evidence necessary to break the philosopher's pride, allowing Breuer to see the wound hidden beneath all that philosophical armor.
This sets the stage for the most inventive and foundational part of the novel, the true deep dive, which is Yalom's imagining of how talk therapy was basically invented in this interaction.
Precisely. Breuer realizes right away that the traditional doctor-patient dynamic, where the doctor is the authority, the silent listener, and the patient is the one asking for help, it's never going to work with Nietzsche.
Nietzsche would just see it as an attempt to dominate him.
And he'd be on the next train out of Vienna.
So Breuer has to abandon that conventional physician role entirely, and the pivotal moment is when he proposes the impossible contract just to keep Nietzsche in the city.
Right. Breuer says, I'll treat your body, your migraines, your physical symptoms, and in exchange, you, Nietzsche, must treat my despair. You have to act as the philosopher-physician for my soul.
Which is radical.
Yeah.
It just flips the power dynamic completely.
It does. But what the novel really emphasizes is the foundational deception in this new relationship. Breuer, in his conversations with the young Sigmund Freud, he admits this is a conspiracy.
A conspiracy.
He's feigning the depth of his despair, using his obsession with Bertha as bait, really, to manipulate Nietzsche into lowering his guard and revealing his own pain.
That's a massive ethical question. Can authentic healing, the kind that needs radical honesty, actually be built on a lie?
Well, Yalom seems to suggest that the therapeutic lie here is only temporary. It's a necessary maneuver to get past Nietzsche's pathological resistance to pity. Breuer's plan is that by appearing vulnerable, he's modeling the behavior he needs from Nietzsche.
And it's only a partial lie. Right, because Breuer is genuinely suffering.
He is genuinely suffering from his birth obsession, even if he's exaggerating his need for philosophical counsel.
But he struggles with the ethics of it constantly. The novel calls this internal doubt his demon butt.
That internal voice of professional vacillation, yeah. It stops him from being fully committed or honest. He knows he's straying dangerously far from conventional medicine, putting himself in this vulnerable, almost equal position with his patient.
So the initial dynamic is tense, is more philosophical sparring than therapy.
Very tense. Nietzsche tries to keep this rigid distance, insisting Breuer use his professional title. But the slow evolution toward genuine intimacy is symbolized when Breuer just starts calling him Friedrich, defying the philosopher's preference for distance.
And what's fascinating is Nietzsche's first attempts to manage Breuer's mind. He treats his anxieties like a bad habit you can solve mechanically. He tries what the novel calls animal trainer techniques.
Right. He suggests external discipline. Like he tells Breuer to find himself 5 kreutzer every time he thinks of Bertha.
Or that process he calls chimney sweeping.
Which is basically just venting the mental garbage through rapid, unstructured writing. These are like really early, clumsy attempts at cognitive behavioral techniques.
But Nietzsche quickly realizes these mechanical methods are not for the human realm.
Yeah, he gets that any real path to self-overcoming has to elevate the individual, not just manage symptoms like a bad habit. He concludes that healing must not lower the healer. He can't treat Breuer as an object to be trained. He has to engage him as a subject to be inspired.
The real breakthrough, then, comes when Nietzsche forces Breuer to adopt the third-person perspective.
So instead of, I feel anxiety or I feel my wife, Breuer has to observe his own misery, his Bertha obsession, his anxiety, his trash-clogged mind from a distance, as if he's discussing the case of a third man, a miserable, successful man named Joseph.
And this externalization just shocks Breuer. The technique works immediately, forcing him into this momentary trance and recognition. Why is that so powerful for him?
Because it mirrors one of Nietzsche's deepest philosophical ideas. To see the truth of yourself, you have to remove yourself from your customary point of view. and then examine yourself from a distance.
Breuer's whole life was defined by the first-person experience of duty.
Exactly. So by putting his life into the third person, he finally gets the critical detachment he needs to judge his own choices, which he's been avoiding for decades.
And this shift in perspective is what finally allows Breuer's revolutionary confession.
He finally, agonizingly, reveals the full, uncensored depth of his Bertha obsession. His intense erotic fantasies, his self-loathing, his belief that he fell in love with her. And he finds it profoundly exhilarating to just finally say the truth, shattering years of repression.
And Nietzsche's response is the foundation of existential therapy. He doesn't judge.
No judgment, no clinical analysis. Instead, he recognizes Breuer's fundamental humanity, his human, all-too-human struggle. He immediately connects it to his own failures with Lou Salome, and that shared vulnerability, that mutual acknowledgement of profound failure, creates the moment of genuine transforming intimacy.
So they're not doctor and patient anymore.
Right.
Or conspirator and puppet.
No, they're two men failing to live up to their own impossibly high standards. The relationship has gotten so unconventional that Breuer's own friend Max bluntly asks him, who's crazier, you or him?
But the real psychological core, the destination they're heading toward, isn't Bertha. It's existential dread.
Exactly. Nietzsche helps Breuer realize that the obsession with Bertha is just a messenger. It's carrying news from his innermost realm. It's a defense mechanism, a distraction from confronting the ultimate existential fears. The void, oblivion, death, fundamental purposelessness.
So his obsession, his anxiety, his chest pressure, these are just petty thoughts, obscuring the bigger, scarier questions about life and death.
Yes. He's suffering discomfort about the wrong thing. The symptom is demanding to be heard, but not just heard, it wants to be lived through, forcing him to address the profound questions he's successfully avoided his whole life.
The problem isn't the woman, the problem is mortality.
The obsession gives him something concrete, something solvable to worry about, so he doesn't have to face the unsolvable, terrifying facts of his existence.
That philosophical diagnosis transitions us perfectly into the core concepts that really define Nietzsche's contribution to this therapeutic dialogue: freedom, suffering, and self-overcoming.
And Nietzsche's challenge to Breuer is absolute. It's uncompromising. He insists that Breuer's life was an accident.
An accident.
Because he never actively chose it. He just, as you said, inhaled the goals and expectations of his culture and his family. He lived a passive life.
So the philosopher challenges him with this fundamental duty of existence. The spirit of a man is constructed out of his choices.
Which means Breuer has to stop hiding behind these comfortable excuses like duty and faithfulness.
Nietzsche calls them shams and soporifics.
Yeah, metaphorical sleeping pills that just lull you into a sleep of mediocrity. Breuer is avoiding the radical, dangerous freedom that Nietzsche insists is the only path to authenticity. The duty to his family, in Nietzsche's view, has become a screen for the cowardice of not choosing his own life.
And we see the direct result of this when Breuer tries to explain his internal shift to his wife, Mathilde. He tries to assert his need to leave, to find himself, and he says he can't give her what isn't his to give yet.
His own claimed freedom. He realizes he has to establish his own individuality first, not as a reaction against his marriage, but as a prerequisite for any true connection. He has to become an axe and cut his way back to his family on his own terms.
So the marriage can only be authentic if he is authentic.
Exactly. And the path to that radical self-possession is through Nietzsche's core, terrifying teaching, amor fati.
The love of one's fate. And this is way more than just simple acceptance.
It is. It requires transforming the passive thought. Thus it was, just accepting the past into the active, powerful affirmation, thus I willed it.
Meaning you have to take everything that's happened, the shame, the loneliness, the illness, the betrayal, the pain, and willingly say you'd want it all to happen again exactly as it was.
Yes.
But, I mean, psychologically, that seems almost impossible for a normal person. We're constantly trying to erase or rewrite our past pains. Why would Nietzsche insist that loving your suffering is the key to a meaningful life?
Because if you reject any part of your life, you reject yourself. If you only affirm the easy parts, your will remains fragmented. To be a truly unified, self-creating individual, an overman, you have to embrace the whole thing. The suffering, the illness, the betrayals, those are the very things that carved you into the person capable of creating your future work.
And this philosophical crucible leads to the most powerful thought Nietzsche shares: the concept of eternal recurrence. This is the ultimate existential test.
Yeah. Nietzsche asks Breuer to imagine that a demon comes to him and reveals that he will live this exact life, every pleasure, every pain, every fleeting thought, every crippling mistake over and over again for all eternity.
And the ultimate question is, would you fall down and curse the demon, or would you reply, "You are a god, and I have never heard anything more divine"?
That concept absolutely jolts Breuer. It challenges his entire scientific foundation. He needs proof, analysis, logic. But eternal recurrence isn't a scientific postulate.
It's a moral or existential one.
It forces Breuer to choose between two paths: comfort and inquiry. Comfort is the soothing fairy tales of religion, the promise of an afterlife, the warmth of social norms. Inquiry is the stark, painful truth of godlessness and finitude.
If he truly kills God, as Nietzsche proclaimed, he has to leave the shelter of the temple.
And accept the responsibility for creating his own value. The thought of eternal recurrence is the lever that forces that radical choice.
And this mutual, painful exchange defines the wounded healer archetype, which is a concept Yalom deliberately uses.
Right. Drawing from sources like Hermann Hesse's tale of two rival healers who discover they were both secretly seeking help from each other.
So Nietzsche, as the reluctant healer, starts to reflect on his own process.
He worries that he suffers from the very things that plague Breuer: pride, loneliness, emotional blindness. He realizes that for the therapy to be legitimate, he has to heal himself first, so the patient can behold with his eyes the man who heals himself.
So the true relationship that's forged between them isn't manipulation or dominance or pity.
No, it's a shared higher thirst for an ideal above them, whose right name, the novel concludes, is friendship.
This seems foundational to Yalom's whole idea of existential therapy.
It is. It argues the therapist can't just be a technician. They have to bring their full, imperfect humanity into the room. If healing requires the therapist to maintain distance or deception, or if it lowers the healer's own moral or intellectual standard, it can't possibly raise the patient. They both have to be vulnerable for the transformation to occur.
And now we arrive at the resolution, the revelation, and the lasting legacy of their intense, brief encounter. This is the moment where Nietzsche, the man of granite pride, finally emotionally breaks.
Breuer, who's now substantially freed from his own crippling obsession through all this self-disclosure, is able to turn his therapeutic gaze fully onto Nietzsche. He suggests that Nietzsche, just like the doctor, did not truly see Lou Salome.
He was too consumed by his own monumental needs.
His ego, his philosophy, his desire for a disciple, he only saw her as a reflection of his own towering desires.
He saw her as a disciple, a plowland for his thoughts, a vessel for lust, and worst of all, a spoil of victory in his competition with his friend Paul Ray.
And Breuer points out the terrible irony. Nietzsche, the prophet of self-overcoming, was blinded by his own vanity.
And this confrontation is devastating, precisely because it's true.
Completely. Nietzsche tries to maintain his composure, but the truth just penetrates his philosophical armor. He takes off his thick spectacles, buries his face in his handkerchief, and just bursts into sobs.
And Yalom is so specific about why he weeps. It's not for Lou Salome. It's not even for loneliness itself.
No. He weeps for the profound, agonizing shame of having never been truly loved or touched by a woman, and the immense, unobserved aloneness of his life that his pride had forced him to embrace.
The hard bed Breuer had offered, the philosophical instruction to face the hardest truths, it finally paid off.
Nietzsche's emotional release is his breakthrough. By being forced to confront the truth that he failed to see the woman, he realizes his betrayal was fundamentally self-inflicted, born of his own projections. It humanizes him completely. It strips away that impenetrable philosophical facade.
Meanwhile, Breuer solidifies his own profound liberation from his obsession. He undertakes this necessary therapeutic journey. He goes to the sanatorium.
He observes Bertha Pappenheim, who's now stable clinging to her new physician, Dr. Durkin. And then he tries to initiate his usual consuming sexual reverie, the fantasy that had tyrannized his mind for 2 years.
And what happens?
The fantasy fails. The powerful internal compulsion is just gone. He describes the stage of his mind as a still life awaiting his direction. The obsessive tyrant has been dethroned because Breuer has chosen to face the deeper void that the obsession was masking. He's genuinely free.
He then tries to test this freedom by visiting Eva Berker, his former nurse and confidant.
Yeah, Eva had long served as his emotional insurance, his reliable safety net, who was always there to listen to his woes.
But he finds a final, crucial lesson in reality.
Eva has moved on. She's no longer clinging to the memory of their intimate conversations. She can barely remember the specific details of his confessions. And Breuer has this profound realization: only the dead don't change.
He can never go back.
Never. And this realization is critical. He returns home, not because he failed to escape, but because he chooses his life. He leaves for a while, travels to Venice to find solitude, and then returns to Vienna. When he reconciles with Mathilde, he's fundamentally transformed his duty into his will.
He's chosen the constraints of his life, which makes them bearable, meaningful even.
And Nietzsche is similarly liberated. Freed by his emotional breakthrough and self-confrontation, he reports this profound healing dream. He sees 8 tall stones sitting as if they are warming themselves around a fire.
What does that symbolize?
A deep communal longing that his isolation had suppressed, but also his newfound potential and wholeness. He feels a great work quickening within him, the beginning of Thus Spoke Zarathustra.
So the novel suggests that the healing for both men came not from some technical cure, but from the terrifying, painful act of mutual honesty, self-confrontation, and disclosure.
Which led to radical self-acceptance. Breuer accepts his humanity, his fallibility, his human, all too human. And Nietzsche is freed, temporarily, from his crippling migraines and pride, allowing him to move toward his greatness. The self-overcoming required radical vulnerability, not stoic isolation.
And this is exactly why Yalom calls it a teaching novel. He constructed this as a historical thought experiment, imagining how Nietzsche, with his philosophy of self-overcoming, might have been forced to invent the core principles of psychotherapy based on his own writings.
And in a wonderful closing note of historical validation, Yalom mentions this fascinating discovery of a letter written in 1878, 4 years before the novel is set, proving that friends were actually trying to get Nietzsche sent to Vienna for treatment by the renowned Dr. Breuer.
So it was a meeting that almost happened.
It almost happened, which lends this eerie, beautiful layer of plausibility to Yalom's profound fiction.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? This entire deep dive has been about the price of an unlived life and the cost of radical self-awareness.
Breuer learned that the greatest freedom isn't the absence of constraints, but the ability to choose and affirm the constraints you already have, transforming your duty into your will. We often define safety through security, routine, and external approval, all the things Breuer clung to. But maybe consider the psychological price you might be paying for your own definition of safety. If you were forced today to face the harsh facts of your own existence, your finitude, your isolation, the death of your youthful promise, what would you truly discover about your unlived life? What moment of radical honesty, like Breuer's confession or Nietzsche's weeping, would it take for you to claim your own destiny, rather than simply letting life happen to you?
Thanks for listening, and don't forget, at Core Concept HQ, we simplify powerful ideas to help you live smarter. See you in the next summary.